Typically, when we have a challenging task that we have to do throughout the day, we push it off for the end of the day, whether it's because we're scared and not succeeding, or sometimes we're scared to succeed. We're scared to show ourselves that we're able to do it. So typically we push it off to the end of the day. If it's something that has a deadline, we push it off until the end of the deadline, right before the deadline. When there's a challenge, we like to get around it, not to go heads on with the challenge. And okay, when we need to do it, we do it. We take on the we take on the challenge. However, there's another theory, which is promoted by some, which is the opposite, that if you have a challenge, you should do it right in the beginning of the day. You should do it as soon as the opportunity comes to do it. And in that way, it would uplift the rest of your day. And instead of this being a burden or pressure in the back of your head, on the contrary, once you succeed, it would be uplifting and give you more energy. In this week's Torah portion is actually a double Torah portion. It's the last two Torah portions in the book of Bamidbar. In the fourth book of the Torah, we conclude the fourth book of the Torah this week. And it is the Torah portion of Matos and Masey. Matos means the tribes, the head of the tribes. And Masey means traveling, journeys. This Torah portion, the last Torah portion, the second one, which is actually the Torah portion we're going to focus on, really summarizes the journey of the Jews in the desert. They're right now by the edge of and right before entering Israel, the edge of the land, and it is already the end of the 40 years. Devarim, the next book of the Torah, discusses Moshe, is pretty much all of Moshe talking, just Moshe talking, preaching to the Jews to the nation before he passed away. And that is, which is the last occurrence that happened in the desert before they entered. So this week's Torah portion, the second Torah portion, Masey, like we mentioned a number of times, sometimes we double up the Torah portions, depending on the calendar, how it works out with the holidays and the Yom Tovim. So this week is a double portion. The second portion, Masey, summarizes the journeys that the Jews took in the desert. The parasha begins with the following sentences. How the second parasha Masey begins. These are the journeys of the children of Israel who left the land of Egypt in their legions under the charge of Moses and Aaron. Right? These are the Torah is going to list the journeys. Journeys, the translation of Masey. So that's how the name of the parsha comes from that word, journeys. Moses recorded their starting points for their journeys according to the word of the Lord, and these were their journeys with their starting points. The children of Israel journeyed from Ramses, which is a city in Egypt. So they left Egypt and camped in Sukkot. They journeyed from Sukkot and camped in Etham at the edge of the desert. Skip a few verses. They journeyed from Etham to camped in Pi Hachirot, which faces Baal Tzephon. Then they camped in front of Migdol. They journeyed from Elim and camped by the Red Sea. They journeyed from the Red Sea and camped in the desert of Sin. They journeyed from the desert of Sin and camped in Dafka. They journeyed from Dafka and camped in Alush. And the Torah goes on and lists all of the journeys and points that all 42 stops that the Jews had in the desert, almost like a shopping list. Goes on and on. It takes over 50 verses in the Torah to discuss and to list all of these places. And honestly, when we're seeing this list, the first question that comes to mind is, why? Who cares? Why does it really make a difference where they were, where they rested? And one of the commentaries, his name was Avram Sabah, he actually says these verses seem the most extra and unimportant verses in the Torah. It seems like it's not telling us anything, not really telling us anything new, and not really anything of importance. To list in 50 verses exactly where the Jews were, where they stayed, it seems extra. Then, when we go a little deeper and I think a little closer, what is the Torah listing? The journeys or the place where they lived, where they rested, where they camped? Seemingly, the Torah is listing where they camped, the cities where they camped, the areas where they camped. If that's the case, the Torah should say these are the camping places, the destinations that the Jews were. Why does it say these were the journeys of the Jews, of the children of Israel? It seems like it's categorizing it in the wrong way. Say these are the places they camped. The 16th century commentator Rabbi Moshe Alshich says the following: why does the Torah chronicle the journeys rather than the destinations, as is common practice to record the place where one has arrived instead of where one's departed? Furthermore, nobody makes the journeys itself their main preoccupation. Rather, one considers what he gained from each place where he rested. Last three words, there's a mistake. It's from last week. So he's saying that, first of all, why is the Torah calling it their journeys, not the destinations? The Torah is focusing the journeys. They travel from here, they reached here. They travel from here, they reach here. And the whole Torah portion is called the portion of journeys of Masey. Why is it not called the destinations? And then he's bothered by the fact that people usually think more about the destinations than about the journeys. And really, the term that the Torah uses, the term of Nesiah, Masey, has the connotation in Hebrew as leaving a place, more than going somewhere. There are two words in Hebrew. There's halicha and there's maseh. Maseh has the connotation we find in a number of verses that maseh, the root word of maseh, is used as a word for leaving somewhere, and halicha is going somewhere. So here, seemingly, this word is giving the impression that the focus here is the journey, is the leaving, not really the coming, which seemingly that is not the case. That should be the case. Should be that the focus should be on the coming, in the places they rested, in the places they camped, not in the places they left. And then finally, we have one final question.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Actually, Masa'ei is trips.
Right.
It's not leaving, it's trips. So it just tells you that there is a trip you're taking.
Right. So the thing is, a lot of times there's words in Hebrew that are similar and not, right? They're similar, but they have different connotations. So the word
to leave is like ozev.
Right, but in biblical Hebrew, so like it says nasu mizeh or vayisu min. On the other hand, like Nelcha means like we're going to go. So in biblical Hebrew, you have this small difference between Nisia and Halicha. Right? That's
Yeah.
right, that's the point. Then we have one final question.
Nesia is when you are on wheels, when you are in a car or a horse and wagon or a train, you know, that's Nesia in modern Hebrew.
Right, so where it's used in Bereshit, Nasu Mizeh, I'm not sure that it means with particularly on wheels. It means they traveled from here, but they left here.
Well,
yeah.
But Masa'e, the real pronunciation is Masa'e.
Yeah.
Masa'e is trips.
Right.
But that's okay,
journeys.
Maybe in the Bible it's a different translation.
Right. Masey means the journeys. The question is, what's the focus? When you say you're journeying somewhere, that shows on the traveling, not on the resting, not in the places you camp. And so that's the question. Why the focus on the journeys, not on the camping? So
maybe the reason is they were trying to really make long trips too, because they have 40 years to get there.
Oh, so that is.
They're not in a hurry, you know.
She's saying they spent more time on the road than camping out. So what's interesting is that soon we'll bring from Rashi that says an opposite idea, that actually, if you see, they traveled for 40 years. 14 of the destinations were included in the first year. And therefore you're really left with approximately only around 30 destinations by which they spent 40 years. So that means he makes the calculation, which soon see, that most of the time they actually weren't traveling. Most of the time they were camping, which he says this is the chesed, this is the goodness that Hashem did to them, that even though Hashem said they go to wander in the desert, he still let them camp out for most of the time. They weren't literally wandering and traveling. We'll see in a few minutes. But to get back to our question, there's one last final question, which is that the Torah says these are the journeys of the children of Israel who left the land of Egypt in their legions. So the Rabbi Shneur Zalman Gliati, the founder of Chabad Hasidism, he asked the question we must understand. So the Torah says these are the travelings from the journeys that they left Egypt. So he says, why does the Torah employ the term Masey journeys in the plural, where the journey away from Egypt consisted of only one single journey? So in our translation, we have it that the Jews are the ones that left Egypt, not that these are the journeys of leaving Egypt. But the first pasuk could also be read. These are the journeys of Israel, of the children of Israel when they left Egypt or leaving Egypt. And there it was seen that all of the journeys are part of leaving Egypt, which is definitely a challenge, because there was one journey that was leaving Egypt, the first journey, which was from Ramses to Sukkot, and afterwards they were already just wandering or traveling the desert, not leaving Egypt. So the three questions that we just posed, that we just brought up. The first question being, why is it so important, necessary to tell us the points of travel of the Jews in the desert? The second question being, why does the Torah call it the journeys, not the camping places? It seems like the Torah is placing more of an emphasis, more of a focus on the journeys and not so much on the places where they rested, on the places where they camped. And then finally, the third question is that it seems like the Torah is saying that the Torah is using the plural. These are the journeys of the Jews when they left Egypt, and it doesn't say this is the journey. Seemingly, it's only one journey, not a number of journeys. So these are the three questions that we would like to discuss today, and eventually, obviously, share a thought from the Lubavitcher Rebbe on these questions. Anyone have any thoughts or comments?
Rabbi, could I ask you a favor, please? Could you
Sure.
share that? I wasn't in the class in the first 2 minutes, and I
I'll
didn't get the,
share it
yeah.
again.
But I also want to say, in that last section, the loving acts of the God. In other words, this is bringing reference to that God was protecting the Jews the whole time, no matter what, which I think is so important to recognize. In other words, God wasn't just there when there was a tragedy. He was there the whole time, watching over the people. I think that's critical.
Right. So you're saying the fact that the Torah is listing all the places to show that Hashem was with us the whole time.
Exactly.
So doesn't really have to list each and every individual place, or it could just say they traveled for 40 years.
But I still think it's important to have these areas listed, because it shows that they were moving, they were trying to accomplish something, trying to gain the territory necessary for the people. It doesn't say that everybody left every territory. It says that they journeyed to each of the different places, but some people must have stayed behind.
Well, I believe that everyone went along, because the whole nation traveled together.
The 600,000?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. You won't want to be stuck on a highway when they're coming by. It's worse than the long trains. Yeah.
Oh
I have a specific question I want to ask. That when I read this in a previous Parsha, one of the places they stopped at was Kadesh. Now that's a name I'm familiar with. Jewish name, Kadesh. I've had people in my lives with that name. So the curiosity is, why would all the other names of these venues be lost? And yet, maybe it was just serendipitous. It's by accident that their name was Kadesh. Is there any rationale for that?
So I don't know for sure. Names is the hardest. All right, names like are something that comes in phases, or almost like.
But anyways,
style.
I just found it to be interesting that
it could also be that Kadesh has implication of holy. So it's a word that's used much more than just that specific place. So it could be
it's really
used
kadosh.
more. It's more what?
It's like kadosh, right? Holy, holy. Yeah. All right. So that puts it in a different perspective. Thank you.
Kaddish. I think sometimes there's a name like Kaddish, Kadosh. So that could be that it's it's a relative, it's a cousin to these words, and therefore it's more prevalent and more common. That might be.
Okay.
I'd like to make an observation.
What?
I'd like to make an observation. I think they mentioned Sukkot. One place was Sukkot.
Yeah, correct.
And Sukkot means temporary dwelling.
Correct.
So that's the only time that I know that they mention how the camp was set up. And here it was set up as a temporary dwelling. The only other place that camp is described is actually by Bilam. He's the only one that describes how the Israelites set up their camp.
Right, that's correct. So saying these are the only two places that we have a description of how they lived or how they camped out.
Well, they said how the tribes are setting up, like the 12 tribes.
Right. Which is interesting also, which is that Sukkot means hut, right? A sukkah is like a hut.
Yes, sukkah is a
And-
temporary dwelling like we do today, you know. a
And
sukkah.
the Bilam is describing tents.
Right.
Tova
Bilam is
V'Lecha, yeah.
describing a more lengthy camp, not the
Right, which was
temple.
many years later.
Right.
Right. All right. So regarding these questions, regarding the first question, the question of why list these places at all altogether. So Maimonides, in his Moreh Nevuchim, Guide for the Perplexed, he says the following idea. He says that the Torah keeps on describing the miraculous way that Hashem interacted and intervened for the people. The way the water came from a well that traveled with them, that was sourced in a rock that traveled with them, the food that fell from heaven, the clouds of glory. So Maimonides says, many years down the line, Hashem knew people are going to say, well, never really happened. They traveled in the desert, but they're around inhabited places. They had what to eat. They had what to drink. They didn't need 40 years to rely on miracles. So for that reason, Hashem said, I'm going to write down, record in the Torah all the places that they stayed. So you can see for yourself that these places are in the middle of the desert. And they were dependent on my miracles. That's Maimonides' approach, a thought that he says, which really explains the purpose of listing all these places. The only thing is that this approach really strengthens the other questions. Based on this approach, the places where the Jews camped is really the primary reason that the Torah is bringing and listing the places. So then it shouldn't be categorized as these are the journeys, but rather these are the places they camped. These are the cities they camped. And therefore you should realize that they had to rely on miracles. So there's another approach, which is Rashi's approach. He actually brings up two ideas. Rashi says this. He says like this. He says the following, number 4. Why are these stations recorded here? In order to make known the loving acts of Hashem, of God, that although he had decreed against them to make them move about and wander in the wilderness, you should not think that they wandered and moved about without stopping from one station to another station for 40 years. All the 40 years, and they had no rest. For you see that there are here only 42 stages, and then Rashi goes on to prove how the first 14 stages were happened in the first year before the decree of staying 40 years in the desert, and then 8 of the stages were after Aaron passed away. So really, they were only all 38 years. They only traveled how many stages? How many places? 20. So it follows that during the whole of the 38 years, they made only 20 journeys, right? 20. So Rashi, he proves it. I cut out his lengthy proofs, but the idea that he's presenting is that it really shows that Hashem could have made this decree much worse and much more harsh for the Jewish people. They could have traveled and been wandering for 40 years straight. And instead, Hashem said that only 20 journeys throughout 38 years. That's nice, but how often does a regular person move? Not regular. I don't know the statistics, but twice, 3 times in their life, 4 times. Most people don't move 20 places in 38 years. And it's still a pretty harsh punishment. So while it does bring out a certain act of Hashem's loving kindness that we didn't have to travel so much, but it really doesn't really fully explain why it should be listed. We still need more explanation. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think this also is making note that we moved the tabernacle every time, and Hashem had a place with us every time. It wasn't just pick up and move and no planning. I mean, to move 600,000 people, that's a huge undertaking and a huge amount of, they had to live every day, but they had to move every day also in order to get to the next destination. And then someone had to decide who's going, when are we going to leave this place? And people having babies, women getting sick, men having to make sure that there was provisions. This is a huge undertaking, huge.
It is. If you look at the second line on the source sheet, it says that the travelings was based on the word of Hashem. Right? Hashem told them when to travel, where to travel, when to travel. It was definitely a pretty intense 38 years.
Exactly. But he was always there. Hashem was always with us. I think that's the most important thing.
That is correct. So then Rashi continues and tells us a second explanation. He brings from Rabbi Tanchuma, expands in another way, and he says the reason why Hashem is listing all the places the Jews stopped. Rabbi Tanchuma is for the following reason. It is comparable to a king whose son became sick. So he took him to a faraway place to have him healed. On the way back, the father began citing all the stages of their journey, saying to him, "This is where we sat. This is where we were cold. This is where you had a headache, etc." So the Torah is listing and really recapping all the places in short, and reminding us of what happened on the way. So again, according to this explanation, again, the focus is really on the places where the destinations, right? That to remind us, these are the places, and remember what happened in these places. It's a recap before the Jews entered Israel, before they go to the next stage in the journey of the Jewish nation, and in coming into a land where they're going to settle. So he recaps what happened in 40 years. And again, this explanation falls short because it doesn't really explain why we're listing the places, but it doesn't explain why the places are categorized as journeys and not as, and it's not, Torah doesn't say I'm listing here the places we can't. It is interesting to note that Nachmanides, he actually says these verses, these 50 so verses, which recount the places where the Jews were, this is a secret, and one of the secrets of the Torah, which is hard to decode. And he says he doesn't really know and understand why they are listed. The real reason why they're listed, none of the reasons really were sufficient, and he really settled with him, and therefore he said this is a secret. He threw his hands up and said this is a secret. And that really shows us how almost challenging it is in understanding why are we giving this detailed listing. So while we quoted and we brought a few explanations, whether it's Maimonides' explanation to tell us and to show us that we always were relying on the miracles of Hashem, we always needed Hashem's hand to support us, and we need miraculous bread and water and shade that we will be able to preserve and live those years in the desert. Whether it's Rashi's reason, where he said two reasons, which either it is to tell us, to show us that we weren't traveling all the 40 years, rather we made 20 stops in the over 38 years, which is a lot, but in the end of the day, it could have been worse. Or it's coming to recap what happened in those years, to remind us what happened. But after everything, Nachmanides says, I don't really have a good reason. This is something that the real reason was not revealed, and it is one of the secrets of the Torah. Which really just shows us on how strong he felt. He was bothered, and he felt the question of why does the Torah list all the places. Now, if we go back to, now I'd like to go back to the second two questions, which weren't why are we listing these places in the Torah, which we have a number of reasons for, or not reasons for, according to Maimonides. Let's focus on the second two questions, which are, first of all, why is the Torah calling the journeys, not the places we can't? And second of all, why is the Torah saying that these are the journeys from Egypt and not the journey from Egypt? Why is it in the plural, not in the singular? Singular, there's only one journey that was really the one that they left Egypt by. There's a comment made by the Baal Shem Tov, recorded in the name of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidus, which the Rebbe quoted many times when he spoke on this parsha and expanded on it, as we shall soon see how he expanded on this saying. The comment of the Baal Shem Tov is that these 42 journeys, destinations, are really all destinations in a person's personal life. Starting from when a person is born until his very last day on earth, he experiences and he goes through these destinations. Egypt is the starting point. Before the Jews left Egypt, they were slaves. They didn't really have an identity. That shows on the beginning of our service of Hashem, the beginning of our journey, our spiritual journey. Then, fast forward to the end of the 40 years, the Jews are by the front of the land of Hashem, the land of Israel, which shows on the end of a person's days, where he is right before going to enter the spiritual land of Hashem, which is heaven. And Baal Shem Tov explains how these journeys all really could resemble different aspects of our life and different, whether it's ups and downs that we have in our life. Just to take two, for example, there's one place that is called Miska, and one place that's called Mora. In the translation of these two places, Miska comes from the word Matos, sweet. The name of the place means sweet, and Mora means bitter. So these are obviously two very different destinations in a person's life. And so too, he goes through and explains some of these 42 destinations and explains how they resemble different aspects in a person's life. And based on this idea, the Rebbe goes and develops this idea to explain the above mentioned questions. It really takes us back to a point that perhaps we spoke about a number of times. which is, what is the purpose of creation, of a person, of us living in this world? And while perhaps we are many times used to the way of life or the ideology that everyone, and that we should just stay the way we are, relax, not to take on any hard undertakings, not to bend ourselves too much, not to stretch ourselves too much. But really, in the Torah's view, the purpose of our creation, of why we're here, is really to work on ourselves and to become better people, and to change, and to advance, and to overcome our challenges, and to turn our challenges into stepping stones. And this is really one of the most basic and fundamental ideas in the Torah view on a person's life, is that we should always strive and work on becoming better people. Becoming better people in our personal life, becoming better people in our service to Hashem, in our religious life, but really that idea of always climbing of the ladder, always climbing the hill, not to get worried, not to get thrown off by the hill, but on the contrary, trying to tackle it, trying to climb over it. That is one of the most fundamental ideas that there are. And this idea actually expresses itself in a number of places. In one place is the way that the day is counted according to the Torah. When does the day start in modern culture? A day starts at midnight, right? 12. In some ancient cultures, it used to start from sunrise. And really, we understand either way. Both of these are a designated point of time. Sunrise, after all, for sure before electricity. Even now, that's when people tend to start to work, when it becomes light outside. For sure, in ancient times when there was no electricity, so for sure that's when the work day started. And it makes sense. You start with the day, and then by the end of the day you go to sleep. And the next working day, next time you wake up, that's the next day. Midnight is a set point of time. Perhaps midnight is ready when people start getting up for the next day. But here in Jewish tradition, in Halacha and Torah, the day starts from the night. It starts from the night. The night is when the night ushers in a new day. So today is the 27th of the month of Tamuz. And the 28th of Tamuz is going to start tonight at around, well, depending where you are, but in New York City, where I am, it's going to start around 8:55. And sunset is 30 minutes before that. So around between 8 and 9 o'clock. And it really varies based on the time of year and based on when sunset and when it's fully dark is, when the evening starts. So in the winter it starts earlier, in the summer it starts later, but it starts with the night. And really, this follows the model of how Hashem created the world. In Bereshit, in the beginning of the Torah, it says it was evening and it was day. Day number one is evening and day number two. So really, it seems like the world was created started with night, with evening, and then came the day. And that's why we count, and our calendar is ran based on night and then day. So the day changes by the beginning of nightfall. And seemingly this is strange. Why by night? Why does it start by night? It's not a designated point of time. It's not when people are starting to work. Why does the day start by night? So one idea the Rebbe once presented is that the this is actually the whole point and really the mission and the goal that we're trying to achieve. The goal that we're trying to achieve is to turn the night into day. When Hashem created the world, he started with night and then he brought day. He wanted to show us that this is the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is that things are going to start off at night. Things are not going to start off glorious, light. And the job of the human beings that he's creating in this world is to turn the dark into light. The idea here is that we shouldn't just be on the receiving side, but on the contrary, that the creations should turn into creators. We should turn into people that we develop ourselves and develop our surroundings and really and work on ourselves and light. And that's why the world was created, and in a more individual sense, every day starts by night in the Torah, because that's the system that Hashem wants. Hashem wants it that things don't start off beautiful, and we turn it into day. And if you think about the Jewish nation, that's exactly how we started. We started off as slaves in Egypt, which is probably the most humilifying and the hardest. They had nothing in Egypt. They started off at rock bottom. And here the nation left Egypt and they received the Torah and they advanced and they really journeyed from place to place. And in their journeys, they developed and advanced until we became into a nation that entered the land of Israel. And if we go back to the Baal Shem Tov statement, Baal Shem Tov is saying the same Baal Shem Tov statement, which is really translating that into our individual lives. It's about us advancing and not just reaching different destinations, but journeying through the destinations. Which means the following: even after we reach a certain destination, we shouldn't stop there. Our job is to continue, to advance, to reach a higher level, to reach a higher height. And that is actually why, if we go back to our original questions, why does the Torah say that, why does the Torah calling it the journeys of the Jewish people? Why doesn't it call it the places they rested? So the answer is because the whole point is that we want to focus on the journey. Life is a journey. Life is not just about getting to destinations, but it's about moving on from those destinations. Always climbing, always journeying, always reaching new heights. And therefore, each journey, each destination is really, once we reach that destination and internalize that level, now it's time to journey again. Now it's time to move on. And that's why the Torah says these are the journeys that the Jews did leaving Egypt. Egypt, like we mentioned earlier, shows on the rock bottom when there were Jews were slaves. And in a certain sense, since life is all about reaching a new height and always climbing, always learning, always studying, always trying to be better and to do better. So really, we're always, in a certain sense, leaving that original Egypt. So every day, it's in a higher way. But it's all leaving away from that starting point, all moving on from that starting point. That's why it says these are the journeys moving away from that point, because we're always moving on from that point, from that starting point, and moving higher and achieving more and new things. And that is why the Torah is called the portion of Masey, the portion of journeys, because it's all about a journey. It's all about moving on. It's not about just the stages we reach, it's about moving on from one stage to the next stage. And this idea that even when we reach a certain accomplishment, which should not suffice without accomplishment, is alluded to into a passage from the Talmud, which explains this idea in a very interesting manner. The Talmud says the following. Barhei said to Hillel, what is the meaning of that which is written? Then you should distinguish between the righteous and the wicked, between he who served God and he who does not serve him. There are two redundancies here. The righteous is the same as he who served God, and the wicked is the same as he who does not serve him. Hillel said to him, the one who serves him and the one who does not serve him are both referring to completely righteous people. You're right, they're both righteous, but the verse is hinting at a distinction between them. As one who reviews his studies 100 times is not comparable to one who reviews his studies 101 times. So Barhei said to him, and due to one extra time he did not review, the verse calls him a person who does not serve him. He said to him, yes, go and learn from the market of donkey drivers. One can hire a driver to travel up 10 parsas, the ancient measuring way of measuring. It's a approximately the equivalent of 3 miles for one dinner, ancient coin. However, if the donkey would travel 1 extra parsa in 11, then he does it for 2 dinners, double the amount. This shows that any departure beyond the norm is considered a significant difference. What the Talmud is telling us is someone could be perfectly righteous. And there's some people that are righteous, whether it is because some people are naturally kind, naturally calm, nice people, and some people have to work on themselves. So, and some people, they worked on themselves and they achieved to refine themselves and to reach a certain height. And now the Talmud is saying there could be someone that is righteous, but he does not serve him, doesn't serve Hashem. And someone who's also righteous, but he is called he serves Hashem. Why? Because he does a little bit more than the norm. At that point of time, there weren't many books. Not many things were printed, and it was and anything you learned, you really have to study many times to internalize it, and that you shouldn't forget it. So therefore, it was normal for someone to study something 100 times, to review something 100 times. So here, Barhei said that by reviewing something 1 extra time, that is already serving Hashem. Meaning the idea here is that 1 time out of the comfort zone, that 1 extra time, which is more than the norm, that is something extremely significant. That is like going, if everyone, let's say, jogs in the morning 2 miles and you go 3 miles, not just whatever. So everyone jogs 10 miles, you go 11 miles. So it's not just you went an extra mile. That extra mile is significant in correspondence with the first 10, because that's the first 10 you're used to. That's normal. The 11th, significant. So here also, whenever we do something that is, we move on, we climb another step in the ladder, we work on ourselves, we achieve a new height, and we make a new goal for ourselves, a little bigger, then that is already serving Hashem, and that's what Hashem wants. That we should always be working on turning the darkness into light. And now darkness, there could be many levels, right? The higher you are, the better, the more advanced you are, the darkness is different. And darkness does, and what we're trying to achieve could also be very different based on where a person is in life. But the idea is that there always should be a push. If we go back to the idea that we started in the beginning of our class, yes, if you have a challenge and you do that in the morning, that is exactly the approach that we are promoting here. not to push it off. On the contrary, the challenge is why we're created for it, to overcome challenges and to advance and to journey. And through that, never to stop at a destination, always to move on. Once we internalize a certain quote unquote destination, to move on to the next one. And that's why the Torah categorizes all these points as journeys, in order to show us that we always should be journeying and moving on, and essentially leaving further and further from quote unquote Egypt, and not just settling in one place. Any questions or comments before we summarize?
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
This explains why in audiences with the Rebbe, when people told them of their achievements, they opened to school or they learned Torah or whatever, the Rebbe said, that's good, but what are you going to do next? Or increase it again and do more. The same line where the Rebbe was coming was from.
Wait, you're not very clear. Wait a second. Let me just turn off the fan. Do you mind repeating yourself? So it's hard for me to hear. My fan was on.
You didn't hear me?
Yeah.
I'll repeat it. Okay, this is why in the Rebbe, with his audiences, with people, they told him of their achievements, they wrote a book, or they opened a school. The Rebbe would always say, that's good, but what are you going to do next? Keep going, do
Right.
more. He always said that, and I always wondered why he pushed so. So, along with the line with what you're saying, the journeys, when you don't stop there, go on, do the next thing.
Yes, exactly. This is one of the almost a very central character in the Rebbe's leadership. This idea of always pushing to that everyone should do more, and once you get used to, once you have a certain, like the example you're saying, once you have a certain amount of let's say children enrolled in your school, why don't you advance? It actually reminded me of a very of an interesting story that I heard once, that there was one of the Rebbe's campaigns is the mezuzah campaign, a campaign of promoting and making accessible people to fulfill the mitzvah of mezuzah. So when the Rebbe spoke about that, some of his chassidim, of his disciples in Miami, went on a campaign, and they put up hundreds of mezuzahs, 100, 200, I don't remember the exact number, but a large amount, a few hundred mezuzahs. It was a huge thing, and a huge achievement. Either people that had and they were invalid, or some people don't know that it has to be written by a scribe. They buy any mezuzah that is sometimes printed. Some people didn't have, so they went up and accomplished and gave hundreds of mezuzahs. And they wrote to the Rebbe a report, right? A report that this is what they did and their achievements. What do you think the Rebbe wrote back? So the Rebbe obviously said, thank you, happy. However, there are another, I don't know how many Jews lived in Miami that time. The Rebbe said a certain amount, thousands of Jews that are still there. So while the Rebbe acknowledged for sure and thanked for what they did, but he reminded them that there's still much more to go. And it's definitely, this is a very characteristic idea in the Rebbe's teachings, how there's this idea of always journeying, always achieving more, and always pushing yourself, and to learn more and to reach a new height. So just to summarize, yeah.
I was just going to mention that it's so interesting that you're talking about mezuzahs, because we came from a state where, the Jewish population is very small and people are not as active at all. Mostly Reform Judaism and very few synagogues altogether. It is practically one large mezuzah. Oh, I'm sorry, menorah. I was talking a little bit about different. Large menorah that is noticed only once a year in time of Hanukkah, and it's always vandalized. It always had all kind of horrible, words and everything that is accompanying that. The first thing that we found when we moved to Florida, we live currently between the Fort Lauderdale and Miami area. It is permanent menorahs on certain blocks of certain parts of city that always feels both, all of us feel so welcome, so joyful that it is there. That's why I believe that symbolics are very, very important because they wake up your conscience to start really achieving something that your destiny was probably to begin with, but without an extra push, as you said, it wasn't really real for many people. When you see that all your neighbors and everybody else cannot follow any of the traditions, that you could hardly find any kosher food at all, maybe in one suburb of Minneapolis with millions and millions of people. And here you travel 2 blocks from your home and you see menorah and you see Chabad house in one place and the second one. And you see on Friday night and Saturday, family are walking to the synagogue. It immediately, even for people who are not so actively involved, create a completely different motivation, I would say, and stimul, and really interesting kind of desire to really be a part of this movement. That's why it's interesting that you mentioned symbolics, because it really matters. It really matters. In a new place, you start looking for groups of people who share your ideas and your belief. Anyway, thank you. It was very interesting. For some reason, I believed that because the main idea of this journey was to actually change the mentality of people from slave kind of type of obedience to a completely new morality, a new generation of people. Maybe it had to do with so many stops, because first of all, older generation were probably some of the people were dying and it was maybe a burial place. But at the same time, it gave people maybe an opportunity to exchange ideas, to communicate about new way of living that would be ahead of them. That could be a reason too why it was fewer stops in farther years, because people really got, it's a new generation. They had a new motivations, new ideas of their future.
Thank you for that thought. And really that works with the idea that we're presenting here, is that, for example, one stop they received the Torah, and then each episode that happened in these different stops really developed the character of the nation and really advanced them. All right, so just to summarize briefly, this week's parsha is the parsha of Masey, which is translated as journeys. And when you read the first verses, you don't see journeys, you see points of destinations. So why is it called journeys if we're focusing on listing the destinations? The Rebbe explains, and based on the idea presented by the Baal Shem Tov, which is that's the whole point here, is that we should not just stop by the destinations, but all these destinations should be part of a journey, and a journey from one place to the next place. And whenever we reach a higher level, then we journey to a new level, And therefore, it's really all the journeys of the Jewish people. All right, everyone, have a good afternoon, and hope to see you next week, God willing, which I think is the last week of this semester.
Great. Thank you,
Thank you,
Rabbi.
Rabbi.
Thank you. Stay safe, everybody. Good to
Thank
see
you.
you all. Really good to
Nice
see
seeing you
all.
guys. Okay, take care.